the WSU website, and I'll send out a link that that shows that. So we'll get started. So WSU Extension is an affirmative action equal opportunity employer, and WSU Extension is part of the USDA, and all of our programs are open to all. So we need to pay our federal bill and to show our justice for all. Very quickly, I'm going to go through the types of information that we're going to share in this webinar today. And we'll give you some webinar tools in just a second. Talk about why we're here. Talk about the economic importance of youth camps. We'll talk about before the fire, the important components of planning, emergency management, importance of connections and communication. We'll hear from a local fire chief, Chief Mike Noakes, and talk about the importance of connecting camps with your local fire resources. Talk about during the fire, talk about evacuation triggers. So what are the events that you're looking for that will trigger an early evacuation? And talk about the importance of communications with parents, staff, and their families, emergency management. And then we have some lessons learned from evacuations with the Girl Scouts in Alaska, and we'll see if we wind up with a connection also from Campfire Alaska with Melanie Hill. We'll talk about after the fire and recovery, and then we'll talk about some opportunities that WSU Extension is going to provide as far as some additional information, not only for camps, but for other folks that are impacted by wildland fire. So some other things, and we're also going to ask your feedback about what you'd like to see in the future. So a little bit about the Zoom screen that's in front of you. So you can adjust your audio settings, and you could test your speaker and check the level. There's also a Q&A, question and answer component. And if you have any questions, open that up, type them in. And when you type them in and hit the send, they'll go to one of my staff persons. Beverly Sarles is there to help us monitor the questions and answers. And we may not get to all the questions that are raised in the webinar, but I do promise that we will respond to each of them shortly after if we don't do them on screen. You can also send your question anonymously if you like to. And then if we have answers, you'll actually be able to see it in the question and answers. There's also a chat feature where you can chat to everyone or just to panelists. And then there's the opportunity to raise your hand and to lower your hand just so that we can you can try to get our attention as we're going through. We will have some time at the end to try to answer questions, as many as we can. I do want to respect your time and keep this webinar to about 1 hour in length, and appreciate your being connected to the webinar during that hour. So as we put together the webinar and looking at last year's, the 2015 fires, more than 1,000 major fires across the United States, we wanted to begin a discussion on the resources that are needed to strategically prepare, especially youth camps, for wildland fire in the 2016 season. And we wanted to be able to have an opportunity to provide resources to help camps to further develop or to review their risk management plans and look at their emergency response plans, especially in regards to wildland fire. So for your camp, you have emergency management plans or risk management plans that may cover a whole multitude of aspects. But wildland fire poses some special risks and some special responses, and that's why we're focused in on wildland fire with this presentation. We want to explore resources that can assist camps in their preparation, in their emergency response, and in their recovery from wildland fire, and provide examples of how regional youth camps have prepared and responded to wildland fires last year and some of the lessons learned through their experiences. And we hope that this is just the beginning, and that we continue a dialogue on educational opportunities around youth camps and wildland fire. Before we get into the presentation, I really want to thank the Wildland Fire Recovery Grant Team, Jordan and Trevor, for your help. Other colleagues with WSU 4-H Youth Development Program, the American Camp Association, Evergreen Region. Appreciate their help in not only being part of the webinar, but then also to helping us promote it. The South Ponderay Fire and Rescue, Washington DNR, that provide this information. Amanda, thank you again for the Girl Scouts in Alaska and Camp Toga Woods, and then Campfire Alaska and Camp K. Robin, thanks for your help and input from Oregon State University 4-H. I've also been working with the Alaska Forest Service, National Park Service in Alaska, and National Outdoor Leadership Schools. So Knowles, Alaska. So thank you all for your help, and appreciate all the input that went into the preparation for this webinar. So when we offer camp as a delivery mechanism for our programs, what do parents expect from camp? The main thing is they expect it to be a safe place and their children will be protected. Just recently, I was walking through the Anchorage airport, and one of the Alaska Airlines staff members was helping me to check in, and she was asking me about my trip to Alaska and why I was there. And I mentioned that I was doing some research on wildland fire and summer camps, and talked about that there were a couple camps that actually had evacuations and suspended sessions last year due to wildland fire. And immediately I saw the blood rush from her face. I said, I can tell you're a mom, and I need to tell you that camps are still a safe place to be, and we're trying to even make it better so that kids are protected. And I can tell you that all the camps that I know do everything they can to keep kids safe, and wildland fire planning and preparation is just one of those things. But it really struck home that when parents send their children off to camp, they kind of assume that there is this bubble of protection that's around their children, and that camp is a safe place. And so they're counting on all of us who deal with camp to help make sure that those decisions are made early for youth to be able to go to camp. I also want to talk just a little bit about emergency versus crisis. And we do a lot of emergency planning. So we look at preparedness, we look at response, we look at mitigation, we look at recovery, and for emergencies. And when those plannings are working well, we're able to see that things go well for all of the participants that are part of the camp. Crisis is when the resources that we have for emergencies are basically used up, and it goes into that crisis mode, and we need to seek other additional sources. Crises also tend to last longer, and they can have long-lasting negative impacts on organizations. So we want to do everything we can to make sure that we're ready for the emergencies, and doing everything in the planning stages that we can to make sure that we avoid those crisis situations. So I noticed that Forrest Ownby just came on the phone line, and Forrest, I'm gonna unmute you. I'm not sure if you're just on the phone or if you've got a web connection, but looking at the fire forecast from 2015, we see here across the country, across Alaska and Hawaii and Puerto Rico, that there were a number of large fire occurrences, over 1,000 large fire occurrences in the 2015 year. And then as we look at the 2016 year, July and August, the predictions are that California, Hawaii, parts of Oregon are looking at above normal fire potential for the months of July and August. And Forrest, do you have any other information on the fire forecast for Washington and the Northwest?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just wanted to be sure there. Yeah, the forecast for the Northwest right now is to be about a normal season. The temperatures are supposed to be above normal throughout June through August. And then the chances of precipitation is about an equal chance. The one thing is that the drought index is showing that southeast Oregon has stayed in a drought condition and is expected to be probably the driest area out of the Northwest. And then another area of significance that could have some fires would be the Arizona, New Mexico across the southern portions there also is looking like it's a pretty dry area. But the other thing that's happening, they're talking about, is a La Nina effect starting to come into the ocean. And as that does happen and comes in earlier, we could see cooler temperatures through August, depending on how that forms up with the La Nina forming. And other than that, I mean, I think the big thing in comparison of the 2 years, you know, we had a big snowpack this year in most of our areas. The one thing is it did come off faster than normal above 5,000 feet, but we did get the precipitation and the snowfall. And so, you know, that is an asset for us. The one thing for our fires, the foliar moisture and all of the timber from the last 2 years has been a very drought. And so that is not going to really retain a lot of extra moisture, pull it from the moisture that we had. So a lot of that, the timber and everything else will stay dry. The new growth will have a lot more moisture in it. So we could still expect to see some fires have some pretty good growth and potential throughout the year, which we did see on the west side of Washington earlier this year. A couple project fires, 100 acres plus in early May. So hot temperatures, dry conditions could really put an impact into that fire occurrence. Okay?
Great. Thank you. I really appreciate you connecting and appreciate you as a resource here in Washington. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So as we look at then near normal, that still means that we will have the potential for several large fires even within the region.
Correct.
So one of the things we wanted to talk about was the economic impact of wildland fire and also the economic impact of youth camps in communities. And so, Jordan, you're up.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, it's nice how we put this before. It's kind of just one that people don't always think about. We all understand the cost of the fire. In Washington last year alone, it burned over 1 million acres and cost upwards of $253 million to deal with. So we always see the negative impact of fire and what it does directly. But what we don't always see is the indirect costs of businesses that aren't running, of tax dollars that aren't coming in. And so one we wanted to take a look at, and it was actually an interesting exercise, was looking at the impact of camps on their local, the local economies. If you go to the next slide, Mike. So in Washington, this is from the ACA, we have over 85 camps with a high concentration on the west side. This does not reflect all of the camps. This was the easiest map to kind of display it on. There's actually even more of these. And so what it shows is 85 camps, over 362 programs, and over 989 sessions offered. This is just a spattering of what is offered. And so it starts to give you a better idea of scale, as this is just the camps offered in Washington. We can go to the next one. So this, in North Carolina, it was very hard to find data on local Washington-based camps and what they did. But in North Carolina, they funded a study that was able to survey and really look at the effect of youth camps specifically. So you can see on the slide in front of you kind of some of the statistics that they had. The survey was able to get over 53,000 families represented, with only 50 camps represented in this as well, and 5,400 staff members. Well, what it broke down to is that these camps, just the camps themselves, were spending $61 million. The average impact of a non-resident family was over 2,000, and then the staff themselves spent on average a season $2,000 and generated almost over $365 million of economic impact on the 4 counties. And they break it down even further by county as they go through them. But what it goes to show is that we don't always think of that impact of the traveling, the food, the all of those elements that it takes. And when wildfire sweeps through and shuts these down, that's when we will really notice in here they said, played out the scenario of they would notice that $365 million and how many businesses were designed to support these camps in their local area. And so if you can go to the next slide, Mike. So in New England, they took it even further, and this takes 7 New England states and really looked at that impact. It's on a broader scale, and the ACA put this on. But what it said was that basically they employ over 190,000 people. Sometimes we get so focused on an individual camp, we don't see the macro level of it. But it had a financial impact of almost $3.2 billion on that economy. And so what I really wanted to look at, and as we were diving into these, was just having everybody be aware of, yes, there's a cost to the wildfire, but there's an even greater cost of the long-term effect. And so by focusing on creating strategic plans of continuity so that we don't lose this impact. Fortunately, none of these people have had to feel that, but I think that's why I'm glad everyone's on the line today, kind of really to look at how do we keep the camps and some of this financial impact going despite the wildfires that are around us. So I think we can go to the next one, but that should be it.
Okay. And one of the things, too, to keep in mind that if your camp does experience any losses due to wildland fire, that probably should be reported to your emergency management and to let them know that that was a loss that can be accounted for in the total losses associated with the fire.
Mike, I have a question for you.
Okay.
We have someone that wants to participate by phone. So can we give them that phone number that they can call in on?
They would have to, it was probably in the email.
Okay, I have it right before me.
Okay.
They can join by phone at 1-415-762-9988. And the webinar ID is 342-553-526.
Okay, thanks, Bev. Okay, one of the planning resources that that we all have access to, and also some great resources as far as helpline and in working through difficult camp situations, is the American Camp Association. And with us today is Katie Johnson. And Katie, would you like to talk a little bit about ACA?
Hi, thank you, Mike. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. So first of all, thank you for putting this together. This is fantastic. As Mike said, American Camp Association, if you are not familiar with us and you're running a youth camp, I highly encourage you to check us out. Simply because we have a lot of resources and we're able to tie together resources such as this webinar and sharing information. So beyond the regular resources, one of the things that ACA has done over the years is put together a hotline, and you can see on the screen there we have the hotline number is listed on there at the bottom. It's that 800 number, and that hotline is manned 24/7, 365 days a year, and it's open to any camp call, so you do not have to be an ACA member or an accredited camp. That resource is there. And as Mike said earlier, you know, there's a difference between emergency and crisis. And when you hit that crisis mode, a lot of times your mind is spinning in a lot of different directions of what do I need to be working on. Our hotline is not staffed by lawyers. We're not staffed by psychiatrists. We're not staffed by doctors or fire chiefs. We're staffed by people who can help you take a step back and look at the situation you're in and assess and help give you resources on what your next steps can be. So they're an objective voice for you. Oftentimes when you are in a crisis, you are emotionally attached to what's going on. So when you call that hotline, you have somebody who's not emotionally attached who can help you think through what your options are and help put you in touch with people who can be a great resource for you. And especially when it comes to evacuations and wildland fires and the things we're going to be talking about today, ACA is great at also sharing information. So if we find out from one camp that they're evacuating, we can help make some phone calls and help connect you with other nearby camps to see if they have resources, see if they have a place that you can bring your kids to. So we can help be a coordinator of some of that and help you out there, and also share information like, hey, this is going on. Does anybody, and if we need to collect something. So it's a great way to resource and to share information as well. Finally, I'll say that one of the other resources that ACA has on this topic is a crisis communication plan. And so we have a sample plan, and that's a big part of this too, is that communication piece and how you work with your public, work with your parents, and work with your stakeholders if something like this were to happen. So it's not just the logistical side of it, but also that communication piece. And we have a lot of those sample plans available to anyone. So if you want more information, we certainly are happy to share more, but just a lot of great resources. And remember that hotline number, write it down right now somewhere on your sticky note, put it somewhere where you can have it. If it's there, you won't have to use it. That's Murphy's Law on that.
Great. Thanks, Katie. And I really appreciate the partnership, the educational partnership with American Camp Association. And then also folks can still join their first year if they've not been a member before.
That is correct. We do have a free membership program that if you want to become a member of ACA, you've not been one before, it's free. You go to our website and just type in free membership, the information will pop up and it gives you a sample of everything we have, and just tons and tons of resources available.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So as we look at emergency planning, and again, most camps are going to have an all-hazard planning. We plan for the general emergencies. We plan for the facilities, looking at things that we can do to make camp a safer place. But when we look at wildland fires, we're really looking at special hazards, because unlike some emergencies that may only have a negative impact on one or two campers, the wildland fire impacts the entire camp. It impacts the staff. It impacts the families of the campers, and it impacts the community as well. And so trying to plan for wildland fire and to actually practice and to fully exercise your plans can be really a difficult issue. And then to complicate that a little bit more, many camps run out of camp programs. So they have a tripping or a backpacking or canoeing, kayaking that goes deep into many of the natural resources places, some of the federal lands or parks that fires could occur. And then we have small pockets of campers and staff that may or may not be known to the resource folks that are trying to allocate the fire resources to protect life and property. And so coming up with ways that we can communicate not only with the federal partners and resources and local emergency managers, but also getting them the appropriate information for when they need it. And it was when we were talking about this in Alaska last week, one of the things that came to mind is that the ranger that you may put your permit in for your backcountry camping at the beginning of the season when you file a number of those, chances are during the height of the fire season that person who knows your permit as better than anybody else on the forest may actually be out on a fire themselves. And so making sure that you're in communication with the fire managers if there's a fire in an area where you have a out of camp group there, but making sure that they're aware of those kind of things. Knowles Risk Management has a model where they really kind of ask managers to define each of their risks and the desired outcomes for each of the risks that they're trying to make a difference in. And then they ask their managers to analyze, to manage, and then inform. And so taking that model of looking at the risks associated with wildland fire in camps, really taking the time, especially if you've got a staff training, to analyze your risk, to manage, look at how you're going to manage that risk, and then to inform staff, campers, parents, the community, and the fire resources, fire and emergency resources of what your plan is going to be. Communications is really one of the key issues that comes up over and over again when we talk about wildland fire and impacting camps and camp programs. And there's a number of players that we need to remember to communicate with all the way through, including the fire agencies, staff and campers, and then families. And one of the tools that Jordan and Trevor and I have been working on is what I call the watch out situations for camps. So as a wildland firefighter, we have watch out situations that are based on lessons learned from previous fires where there's been firefighter injuries or fatalities. And so we have these watch out situations that when you notice this happen, that your head kind of goes on a swivel and you're really anticipating that this is not a good situation to be in and something that we need to make a change on. So one of the tools I'm going to share with you after the webinar are 13 watch out situations that we have for camps. And these are things that if you go through the list, and I know most of the camps that I'm aware of can go through and say, yes, we've done it, we've done it, we've done that. But there may be one or two in this list that you haven't or don't feel completely comfortable about. Those are watch out situations. And those mean that those are something that either during the camp season this year or in the off season that you can work on. So I promise to share that resource after as well. So right now I'd like to introduce Chief Mike Noakes. And Mike is going to talk a little bit about, from the fire department perspective, about working with camps and the kinds of information that would be helpful for your local fire department to be aware of during your camp season.
Thank you, Mike. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
All right. Our fire department is very fortunate to be working with the YMCA Camp Reed. They recently came into our fire district through a property merger, and they've actually really kind of taught us how to interact with the camp and make them and us more integrated in providing a fire-safe atmosphere for the campers. It really started with site visits, and that's probably one of the most important things that local fire departments and emergency managers can do, is spend time in the camp and learning the lay of the land of the camp itself. We've gone to annual visits with Camp Reed and local camps that we have in the area, so that way our members get familiarization with the campgrounds and the people that run them. Also, the other things that they provide for us that's been extremely helpful is maps of the facilities, having the ability on the way to a fire to pull up a map and look at the grounds, where cabins are at, where potentially people might have gone off-site camping, where those locations are at, and the documentation on that of what they call it. They have different names at all these camps for certain areas, and when they tell us to go to this location, a lot of times that can be confusing. And so by having the pre-plans and the maps already set up, the responders can locate that and respond to that area very quickly. Also, most camps are extremely rural. This camp that we work with is probably 6 miles to 8 miles to the closest fire station. And they've gone above and beyond to ensure that we have access to the camp and access to water. They've installed 2 dry hydrants for us so we can get water right out of the lake that's right next to them. Obviously some camps aren't going to have that ability if they're not next to lakes, but by them providing that water access has been a huge help for us, in emergency planning in case that there is a fire. And also the access to the camp itself, of spending time to make sure that the fire trucks can get into the camp, get into the buildings, get around the camp to provide protection to the camp and the campers. Something else that they've done that I think has really gone above and beyond is they've sought out pre-plans with local busing companies. And so that way, if they have to do an evacuation, they have all the plans pre-set up. So that way, they just have to notify the company that's local, the nearby school district that has a contract with the bus company, and they come out and bring the buses for however many students that they have. This camp, I don't know in comparison to other camps, but typically through the end of June, through the end of the summer, they're looking at about 300 people on site that they're going to have to evacuate in case there was an emergency. So they've really kind of taken the ball and gotten the pre-plans all done ahead of time. So that way, if there's an emergency in a county, a lot of times it's not that the people don't want to think about these things. It's that it's so far on the back burner that they forget about it. And so, getting them the resources they need to evacuate might not be the first thing in the minds of the people running the incident. So with their forethought, taking those steps, it's really setting them up for a benefit in an emergency situation. And they are ACA accredited, and that was another thing that discussing camps with them is finding out that what the ACA offers and being accredited, and how a lot of camps that go through that process, like the speaker before me, talked about all the resources they have available. And so as a fire district going out and talking to people that are, opening camps or starting camps, or maybe has a camp that's not familiar with it, bringing that information to them so that way they can get that information and see what resources they have available to them. So hopefully that they can share that and become more safe. So, briefly kind of just touching on those, that's really what's helped us a lot, helped us learn with the camps. And, I think with the partnerships that we're forming, like I said, it's taught us as a fire district how to integrate with the camps, and allowed us to be more successful and take the partnership on to the other camps that we have in the area, and kind of use this model with all the camps.
Thanks, Chief. I really appreciate your time and your leadership in the fire service here in the county. And one of the things I always tell camps, it never hurts to invite the fire chief over for lunch. And it's a good way to bring the big red truck and make sure it can fit down the driveway and interact with campers or staff when you have it. So, Mike, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
No problem.
The other thing that camps can do is to have defensible space. And so when a fire department would come and visit your camp, then one of the things that they can look at is kind of the zones around the buildings and around the camp that would make it more defensible from fire, and make it so that there's the potential for success in keeping fire away from buildings and structures. And California actually has a law that you have to have 100 feet of defensible space, 30 feet pretty much clear right around the home, and then manage vegetation into the zone 2, into the 100 feet. So one of the best ways to learn more about defensible space for homes, and also can be extrapolated to camps, is through a federal program that's called Ready, Set, Go. And with us today from Ready, Set, Go is Caitlin Sullivan and Katie, I believe, right? And so we appreciate you here. And maybe if you can talk about, just real quickly about Ready, Set, Go, and some free resources for camps. That'd be helpful.
So Ready, Set, Go is a completely free program to join. And you see we have our website listed there below, wildlandfirersg.org. And so joining is very simple and free. And so you'll go ahead and you'll go onto our website and you can join through there. You'll find that many of the questions during the sign-up process are targeted towards fire departments, but don't let this deter you, as our next wave of members will be community members like yourselves. So I encourage you to log on. You'll also find a lot of our resources, including our English action guide, which talks a lot about defensible space and preparing your family, and etc.
Yeah, and one of the free resources that we have that we thought would be really pertinent to camps is our youth action guide. And it is just a brochure, and it is a coloring book for kids that takes them through, like, wildland fires, what you should look out for. It shows them what typical wildland firefighters wear, and then it goes through the ready, set, and go steps for the kids. And then in the last part, you can add, it says your parents' cell phone, your family friend's name, to help as part of developing your action plan in the event of a wildland fire. And again, the Ready Set program is a completely free program. We offer free materials to our members. So if you're interested in joining, just check out our website. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Katie. You can email us at rsg@iafc.org.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, ladies, for being part of this today, and appreciate all the work of Ready, Set, Go. A great program and great resources. So when we look at camp evacuation planning and creating that action plan, because it is truly an action plan, one of the things to keep in mind, the most important thing is leave early. By leaving early, you give your campers and staff the best chance of surviving a wildland fire. You also help firefighters by keeping the roads clear of congestion and enabling them to move more freely and do their job. One of the things that you want to have in your plan, and even if these aren't in your plan this year, I would recommend that you take the time now to develop these. And you can involve your local fire department or emergency management folks in helping you to come up with these. But I call these triggers, and those are the things that if the fire is in this location, if our road is potentially closed off, if the smoke gets to a density that is going to have a negative impact on our campers, that we make the decision to either suspend camp for that week or to look at evacuation and get to a safe place. Chief Mike Noakes talked about pre-plans, and that's what fire departments try to do, is have a pre-plan for what's going to happen. It helps us to manage those emergencies and keep them from becoming crises. And really that's what camps need to do, is to have a pre-plan, especially around evacuation and what are those triggers that are going to cause us to make that decision to evacuate. And many camps have found that if they suspend a session, that they can still get those campers in later, and really err in the side of safety for campers and staff. And one of the things is to make sure that you have alternative routes for road closures, that you have a way to maintain communications. One of the lessons learned that I think we'll hear, and I've heard from other camps, is that assign the task in camp. So everyone knows what they're going to do in case of a wildland fire and an evacuation. Everyone has their role assigned. And don't wait till it's time to evacuate. It's going to be too late and too confusing to try and do that. And one of the key assignments is that you have one person who's designated to make that connection and to follow the wildland fires that are in your area around your camp, and that they probably need to do that on a daily basis and make those connections with local fire department or with incident commands that may be set up for large fires, and to keep in complete contact, and so that you can make those informed decisions as a camp of when to go. Emergency supplies and coming up with a checklist of those supplies of what campers can take, what staff can take, what the medical staff will take, and records retention, and then close down procedures of who will do what. And my recommendation is never leave one person to do all the shutdown procedures alone after the campers and staff have been evacuated. Always have two people that are there just for safety and communication. And then making sure that communications happen with staff, that they're informed all the way through those decisions, and then campers to the extent available, and then keeping families in touch, especially if you have to come to the decision to evacuate. So I had the pleasure of spending last week in Alaska, and had the pleasure of talking with Amanda Block. Amanda is with Girl Scouts Alaska, excuse me, and they operate Camp Toga Woods, and they had to make a tough decision with the sockeye fire just outside their camp last year. And so I'd like Amanda maybe to talk a little bit about lessons learned and things that you would suggest to camps about evacuation. So Amanda, I unmuted you.
Thanks, Mike.
We can hear you.
Perfect. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So last year, the sockeye fire became one of the major fires in Alaska. It was approaching pretty close to camp, leading up to one of our camp sessions. So we had all of our staff at our camp, and at the time we were analyzing the fire. We did not have our campers and staff, but we were looking at a fire that was still rapidly growing. It was 0% contained, and there was pretty thick smoke in the air. And so we had to make a decision based on all of those factors, and we were just not confident that the fire would get under control, it would stop growing, or that the smoke would clear from the air. And so we very proactively decided to cancel our upcoming camp session, to communicate with all of our parents and offer them a couple of different options, that they could either move their camper to our day camp, which was about 40 miles away. They could reschedule their camper for another session of our resident camp, or a special session of resident camps that we added on for those. We were able to reschedule, I think, all but 5 of our campers with those options. We took our camp staff and evacuated all of those people, moved them to our day camp for the week, and increased our camper numbers there quite a bit. So we had most of our staff who moved to that location, but we didn't need all of our staff at our day camp location. And so we did some really quick thinking. Alaska is a very, very big state. So once we start to move out of our central location where our resident camp is and our day camp is, we have some areas of our state where we have kids who can't really easily get to camp. And so we were able to work with a couple of communities where you have to get to them by plane or by train. And we reached out to those communities and we said, hey, we've got this situation at our resident camp. We can't do camp there this week because of a wildfire. Would you like us to get some staff to you and offer a day camp? And we had 3 communities that jumped on board within 24 hours. We scheduled those camps, flew or trained our staff to those locations, and they did day camp for campers. And we were able, for the first time ever in those communities, to serve about 100 girls at those camps who had their first camp experience ever. And it was so successful for us that those camps are now permanently, those locations are permanently on the schedule. And we'll be going back to them this summer and in future summers as we move forward. So Mike, I don't know if you want me to talk anything more about lessons that we learned. Big key things for us were having all the communication in place, being able to reach out to the right people. The American Camp Association was critical for us, both in resources of how do we communicate, what do we communicate, when do we make the calls, and linking us into other camps who had made those calls so that we could brainstorm with them. And then pre-writing all of the communication that we needed to write, so that when we got to those moments of saying we're going to evacuate, we already had all of those scripts ready to go.
Thanks, Amanda. And I can't commend you enough for your entrepreneurial and kind of creative thinking of turning a difficult situation into a real success story. So I really commend you for you and your staff for all the work that they did. And Camp Toga Woods is a great location. And I ran into a Forest Service fire officer who actually grew up at Camp Toga Woods each year, and you've made a very positive, long-lasting impact on her, and I encourage her to reach out to you and to connect back to Camp Toga Woods. So you have a great legacy and a great camp, and I think a great success story, and what looks like a wonderful plan for moving forward in dealing with any of the emergencies that may come up. So thanks for being on the call too.
Yeah.
So another camp that experienced evacuation was Camp K, campfire in Alaska. And they actually did a physical evacuation of 65 campers and about 20 staff. And they know it was successful because all the campers thought it was just a field trip and a sleepover. And in fact, later in the sessions in weeks after the evacuation, and the fire never approached their camp, but it threatened to close off their only road in and out of camp. And later in the sessions, some children that knew other kids that were there during the evacuation asked their counselors when they were going to be able to take their field trip and sleep over. So again, another camp that turned a very difficult situation into a very positive one. And one of the lessons learned there was the need to really communicate with staff and to keep them in the loop. And then they felt they did a really good job of communicating with the parents and the families of the campers. But when they debriefed the issue, they found that they probably did not do as good of a job with camp staff and making sure that their needs and then the connection to their families after the evacuation were taken care of. So two great camps in Alaska that went through difficult times and turned them into very positive success stories. So some great camps in Alaska to take some lessons learned from. So the last part of the presentation is talking about after the ash and looking at the recovery phase. And so Trevor is going to quickly go through a bunch of information. This is truly going to be like drinking out of a fire hose as Trevor gives us the information. So Trevor, you're up.
Thank you. And I'll try to be respectful of everybody's time, and we're going to breeze through this really quickly. But after the fire, after the smoke, and after the ash has cleared, many of us, despite the best laid plan, find ourselves wondering what to do next. Next slide, please. We're going to cover three things: the financial aspects, agency resources, and the psychological impact to youth and the different resources that are available. Next slide. In a nutshell, the thing to take from this slide is that fires are growing, and the money being spent on suppression is taking away from other aspects like planning programs and prevention programs. Next slide. So in regard to the financial impact, there's federal, state, and local resources, and we're going to cover some specific public agencies for recovery, cost sharing, and financial assistance, resources, and other information, as well as the different support that's out there. Next slide. So in regard to private resources, when you're looking at the financial impact to recovery, you want to establish an emergency fund. I can't stress the importance of earmarking funds for situations such as this. There's also nonprofit grants for community resilience and disaster recovery. There's a whole smattering of different options out there that I know some extension offices may be able to help you. There's also insurance policies and coverage. And real quickly, the things to take away from that is store the policy in a safe place. Make sure the policy covers natural disasters, as well as specific language with wildfire and flooding, which usually happens after fires. And be aware of the fine print. National resources, next slide. I'm going to go through these really quickly. FEMA is really important on the front end with planning and preparation, but you also need them on the recovery side of things. And there's a list of easy to access resources for you. Next slide. Department of Labor, this is really important in terms of recovery hazards and worker safety during cleanup. Next slide. There's also the Department of Agriculture, but the USDA is a rather large agency, and so the two particular sub-agencies that you want to make contact with are Natural Resource Conservation Service and the Rural Development Office. The Extension Disaster Network, also known as EDEN, is a very helpful tool in terms of planning and being ready for the recovery side of things. And these state agencies are fairly applicable across the country. In a lot of instances, different states call these offices different things, but the Division of Emergency Management is an important department to work with. Next slide. Department of Commerce has lots of resources, loans, and grants available to serve and support your camps in the aftermath of wildland fire. The State Department of Agriculture, they have food assistance programs, communication and weed control and reseeding efforts, and they also participate in recovery roundtable initiatives to help identify community needs and other resources. Next slide. Department of Natural Resources is also another good source for technical assistance, cost share programs, and support with forest practice after the fire. At a very local level, our Ferry Conservation District has made themselves available for assessing tree injury, flood risks, and evaluating your property. And there's a link there for financial and technical assistance because they usually partner with NRCS on different programs. Your local economic development office, they usually have access to grants, different cost share programs. They also may know about small business loans and other things to help camps recover. You also have your extension office, the County Noxious Weed Office for seeds and bioagents, and I know that our county assessor had some resources to assist people in the recovery process as well. Last, one of the things that's really important is the psychological impact. To tell you a quick little story, my 8-year-old still triggers anytime the weather gets hot or he sees dead grass, and he remembers the fear of having to evacuate and everything else. And the important thing to take from this is every child is different. Some are more resilient than others, but there always is a component to their well-being, their mental health that you want to consider after the fire. And then the last slide has a link to more resources from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And I think that's everything.
Great, thanks, Trevor. Appreciate that. Appreciate going through that quickly. I know it's a lot of information, which kind of leads us to kind of the recap and kind of the final component of our goal at WSU Extension in partnership with all the folks that you've seen as part of the presentation is to develop an accessible online learning site for the best practices for camps to prepare for wildland fire occurrences before, during, and through recovery. So one of the things that's going to happen is that tomorrow you're going to receive another email from me. It's going to include a Qualtrics evaluation, a survey. And what's really important for us is to understand what other needs you have as camps that we can address from an educational perspective and provide either future webinars or other online trainings to help answer those questions and better prepare you for dealing with difficult situations such as wildland fire in your camps. So it's really going to be helpful for us to know what kinds of things that you would find to be helpful in the future. So if you don't mind using the chat box, if you've got some ideas about some things that would be helpful, you can fill them in now. And then also please fill out the surveys that you'll receive as an email. One of the things that that we have also going in Washington State University is that this project was part of kind of a three-pronged approach of looking at how we recover as a state from a very difficult wildland fire year. And so the first prong is this webinar and the preparations that have gone into it of looking at how we can prepare youth camps. So the other components that would be there would be a potential webinar in the future on how do you market timber that's been burned over, what we call in the industry black timber. And then Jordan, if you don't mind talking about maybe some of the other opportunities that there may be for other connecting points with WSU and communities that are impacted by wildland fire.
Yeah, the wildland fire opened up opportunities to apply for multi-state, multi-region grants. So we're looking into a couple USDA, FEMA, some local foundation grants to push not only the recovery, but also preparedness. And we've separated into two teams, one looking at the youth, one looking at the economic side of how do we, like Mike said, deal with the black timber. And then we're also looking at how do we help small businesses affected by the disaster. Then we have another group looking more at the fire-wise, the preparedness, those different elements, and kind of culminating all of that information into something that's more usable either through online medium, such as a website, but also through print materials and a couple different ways. So if it's something you're interested in being a part of, please feel free to reach out and touch base because we're starting to move in that direction, especially as we pull in more funding to do it. Yeah, we'll be looking to everyone on this call for kind of a resource to move forward.
So that kind of concludes the formal part of the presentation. If there's any of the presenters who'd like to add anything to this, the one thing is Trevor was talking about, I know that Amanda and then also the Campfire in Alaska is taking advantage of some defensible space grants of looking at making this defensible space, removing understory brush from DNR and other resources. So there are grants out there that can help prepare camp for better outcomes with wildland fire as well. Anybody else on the panelists who'd like a final shot? You can unmute yourselves and okay. Thank you to all our participants. We appreciate you being part of this. Please let us know how this information was useful to you and things to take away. And more importantly, what kind of resources, what kind of information you'd like to see in the future. Many of the topics that we had presented today could be their own 1 hour more in-depth webinar. And if any of those topics kind of resonate with the needs at your camp, then we're happy to look at how we can facilitate that. Again, thank you to the great panelists from across the country, and really appreciate your time and effort in not only in the planning, but in presenting today. So thank you very much. And as a forester, I'd like to end by saying, may the forest be with you. Thanks, have a great day.